Today's lesson is going to be talking about how to solve equations involving squares and cubes. So I have the equation x squared equals 16, so my job is to find what value of x, when I square it, do I get 16. The inverse operation of a square is to take the square root, so my next step I'm going to do is take the square root of both sides, and I have to do it to both sides to keep the equation balanced. When I take the square root of x squared, I'm left with x. And on the right side, when I take the square root of 16, I have 4, because 4 times 4 equals 16. So I found my solution that the square root of 16 is 4. However, we need to be careful, because I was asked what times itself gives you 16. And we need to remember that a negative times a negative is also going to give us that positive. So it's not that 4 is the only solution we have. I also have negative 4 being a solution. And there's a little shorthand way of writing that. If I want to show that 4 and negative 4 are the solution, I put this little plus minus symbol in front. And what that symbol means is that 4 and negative 4 are solutions to my equation. And the proof of that is 4 times 4 equals 16, and negative 4 times negative 4 equals 16. So the solution to my equation, x equals positive and negative 4. Let's try another problem. What if x squared equals 45? So once again, my job is to find the value of x so that when I square it, I get 45. And the way I can do that mathematically is to take the square root of both sides. On the left side, when you take the square root of x squared, you're left with x. And when you go to take the square root of 45 on the right, you realize that there's not a whole number or an integer that when you multiply it by itself, you get 45. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this as a square root because we don't know what the square root of 45 is exactly, but we know that that's going to be our solution. And just like the last problem, since a negative times a negative will also give us a positive, I need to show that the positive at square root of 45 and the negative square root of 45 are my solutions. What if I have x squared equals negative 9? So we go through our steps. To undo the square, we have to take the square root. And the square root of x squared on the left is x. And the square root of negative 9, I'm looking for some number times itself that gives me a negative 9. Well, the only number times itself that will give me a 9 is 3. But 3 times 3 is a positive 9. And a negative 3 times a negative 3 is also going to give me a positive 9. There's no type of real number that when I square it, I will get a negative, because every positive times a positive is a positive, and every negative times any negative is also a positive. So we would say that there is no solution to this equation, because no number times itself will give me a negative 9. But what if my equation has a cube involved? So now I have x cubed equals negative 27, so what number times itself 3 times will give me that negative 27? Instead of taking the square root, that's not going to get rid of the cube, so I need to take the cube root of both sides of my equation. Now that I've taken the cube root of the left side, I'll be left with x. And the cubed root of negative 27 means what number times itself 3 times gives me a negative 27. And that answer is a negative 3. I can very easily take the cube root of a negative number, but there is no way in the real numbers to take the square root and get a negative number. So since negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 is my negative 27, the cubed root of negative 27 is a negative 3. Now you might be wondering, what about positive 3? Well, let's see. Does 3 times 3 times 3 equal a negative 27? And the answer to that question is no, it does not. So when you have cubes involved, you only have one solution, because when you multiply 3 positives, you'll have a positive number, but when you multiply 3 negatives, it's going to stay negative. Okay, last one. What about x cubed equals a positive 64? Well, what do I need to do in order to solve for x? I need to take the cube root of both sides. And the cube root of x cubed will leave me with my x, which is what I want. And don't be fooled with the square root of 64. We're looking for the cubed root of 64. And the cubed root of 64 is 4, because 4 times 4 times 4, or 4 cubed, equals a positive 64. And once again, just like the last one, my answer cannot be negative 4 because a negative 4 times a negative 4 times a negative 4 would give me a negative 64. And that's not what I want. I want a positive.